Good afternoon, Council. This is the Monday, May 16th, 2022 Council meeting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Councillor Henry in the chair, and for a moment I was looking for my gavel to bang, but of course I don't have my gavel because we don't do that anymore. Happy to see you all virtually today. We'll begin with a roll call, starting with Ward 1.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Hammer present.
Councillor Bodley present.
Councillor Veith present.
Councillor Freeman present.
Councillor Bassick present.
Councillor Bonagor present.
Mayor Jaworski here.
And the chair is here. So that's all of us. Move on to our territorial acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which many of us are gathered today and on which we are broadcasting from today is the land traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous peoples with whom we share this land today. We have as well a moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we pause to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. Before we move on to disclosure of pecuniary interest, one more note of reflection, and I know I'm disheartened, but unfortunately not surprised that it is yet again something for us to read this afternoon, and so I will go ahead. This past weekend, our U.S. neighbors again experienced mass shootings. This all too familiar occurrence is heartbreaking. The loss of life is devastating and destroys the hopes and dreams of the victims and causes indescribable pain and anguish for families, friends, and communities. The shooting in Buffalo, one of our closest neighbors, was yet another hate-fueled act of violence against innocent people engaged in normal daily activities, including grocery shopping and working. These were good and innocent people, undeserving of any act of violence against them. They were targeted and murdered because the gunmen didn't like their skin color. This ongoing white supremacist violence must come to an end, not only in the United States, but here in Canada and everywhere around the world. On behalf of Council, I offer our heartfelt condolences to the families and friends of the victims. We commit to calling out these senseless acts for what they are and for taking the actions we can to help deter these senseless acts. We further call on governments everywhere to have the courage and strength to enact changes that help to deter these acts of violence, so we may finally see a day when these attacks end. Please join me in a moment of silence as we remember the victims. Thank you. I will look now for any disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing and hearing none, that takes us to approval of minutes. We have one set from the April 25th council meeting. I will look to wards 1 and wards 2 to move and second this and start the vote.
Councillor Hammer, I move approval of our minutes and I vote in favor.
Councillor Bodley, I'll second and vote in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Sorry, Councillor Bassick in favor. Am I loud enough?
Coming through clear for
You're
me.
coming in great now.
Councillor Bonagor in favour.
Mayor Jaworski in favor.
And the chair is in favor, so that carries. We have a consent motion with a number of items on it as printed in the agenda. I see Councillor Veith looking to move the last item, and I'll read that as moving this item. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hammer. Anything anyone wants to remove from consent to discuss further? Seeing none, we'll take the vote then, starting with Ward 1.
Councillor Hammer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vassic in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favour.
Mayor Jaworski in favor.
And the chair is in favor as well, so that carries. There are no items that we removed from consent, so we will move on to item 8, staff reports. And these are, finance meetings are very exciting stuff, especially if you love numbers, and if you don't, it's very important stuff that we work on here, and they really drive how we build out as a city. First up, speaking of growth, we have the development charge and community benefits charge update. And we do have a presentation on this item. I think Michael Pugliese is going to introduce our consultant here, Stefan Krasowitz.
Thanks,
So
Chair Henry. Yep. Okay, welcome. Good afternoon, Chair Henry, members of council. I want to introduce Stefan Chachunovic, associate partner from Hemsey Consulting. They're working on our project for development charges, community benefit charge updates, and Stefan will be presenting a presentation to supplement report Corp 2022-025 on development charges and community benefits charge update. So without further ado, Stefan, take it away.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Chair Henry, members of council. Next slide, please. Great. So this is a fairly brief and high-level update on the 3-part study that we've been retained to assist the city with. The first part is going to be an update to your development charges bylaw. The second will be your first community benefits charge strategy. And I'm going to spend most of my time in the next 10 minutes talking a little bit about community benefits and how the new legislation works and its applicability to Waterloo. And then our final role in this is to assist essentially as peer reviewers for an update to your Parkland dedication bylaw. Next slide, please. I'm sure everyone on council is aware of this, but just in case you aren't, development charges are fees that are imposed on development to pay for growth-related capital costs. So it's capital costs only, not operating costs, and only to the extent that they involve the expansion or construction of new infrastructure and new facilities to expand services and maintain service levels in the face of what is a rapidly growing city. The development charge study will only be looking at the development charges that the city imposes for the services that it provides. There are, of course, other development charges in force in the region, including those that are charged by the region itself and occasionally by the school boards for land for schools. But the principle behind all of these charges is that growth should pay for itself, so that the cost of expanding infrastructure, building new facilities, is not borne by your existing tax and ratepayers. Next slide, please. Your development charges bylaw doesn't actually expire until the end of 2024. So the need for this study is not being driven by the expiry of the current bylaw. It's really being driven by quite a lot of legislative changes that have been enacted by the current government. In particular, the ability of the city to increase the funding for some critical services for which it collects development charges right now, especially parks, indoor recreation, and libraries. That has increased, and you can now fund 100% of the growth-related capital for those services. But on the flip side, there are a couple of services in the current bylaw that, as of September this year, will no longer be eligible for DC funding, and that includes parking and, to a lesser extent, cemeteries. So in passing a new bylaw and even amending the current bylaw, you have to undertake a background study, and that's what we've been retained to prepare for you. You have to hold at least one public meeting, and there is a right of appeal to the new bylaw, and those appeals are adjudicated at the Ontario Land Tribunal. Next slide, please. On the left, there is a table showing you what the current development charges are in the city. So it's about $18,000 for a single detached unit and a semi-detached unit. And then there are lower charges for smaller unit types. So it's just under $12,000 a unit for a row house, and then just under $10,000 a unit for an apartment, although there are larger and smaller charges for very large apartments and then smaller charges for lodging houses. And then the pie chart here shows you where the money goes. And it's quite a diverse range of services. As you can see, most of the charge is for the engineered services of water, sewer, storm, and roads, as well as the parks and indoor recreation facilities. And that gray piece of the pie, the bottom there, the parking and the cemeteries, about 7.5% of the total charge. That, as I say, will become ineligible in September this year, so you will no longer be able to impose a DC for those services. Next slide, please. There's also a charge in place for non-residential development. It's about $82 a square meter. And that charge is more heavily skewed towards the engineered services of water, sewer, and roads, and stormwater. But again, you can see that parking, 12% of the charge, that will fall away in September this year. Next slide, please. As I say, the second part of the study is to do the city's first community benefits charge strategy. So this is new legislation, and I'm just going to describe sort of how it came to be and how it might apply in the city. Next slide, please. It's essentially replacing the old density bonusing arrangements that have been in place for some time and which the city's availed of quite frequently, well, with increasing regularity over the last decade. And essentially, the density bonusing worked as an agreement between a developer and the city. The city would grant additional permissions to build higher buildings and denser buildings over and above the zoning bylaw. And in return, the city would secure cash payments or other contributions to pay for local community benefits like public art or bus shelters, as you can see here, or daycare spaces. Next slide, please. And there was some criticism of the way these agreements were struck. Because they were done by agreement, there was sort of a fairly ad hoc approach to them and not a very consistent approach from one municipality to the next. And there was, in some parts of the GTA, certainly, there were concerns about how the funds were being spent and how quickly they were being spent and whether they were being spent for the purposes for which they were raised. And so this government has replaced the density bonusing framework wholesale with a new community benefits charge that's more formal, more structured. And as I say, that will come into place on September the 18th this year. You won't be able to strike any more agreements for density bonusing after that date. And your only avenue to fund these community benefits will be through the community benefits charge bylaw. Next slide, please. So as I say, this is no longer going to be done by agreement. It'll be done by bylaw. only local municipalities can impose this new charge. So it's not for regional services, for example. And the charge can only be imposed on higher density apartment buildings. So apartments with 5 or more stories and 10 or more units. And it requires, similar to the development charges bylaw, it requires a background study, it's referred to as a strategy, in advance of passing the bylaw. And then very importantly, there is a cap on the charge. So regardless of what charge you have in the bylaw, individual payments for individual sites are capped at 4% of the land value of the site, with the land value representing the value the day before the building permit is issued. Next slide, please. There's quite a broad scope, though, of what kind of projects and services the CBCs can fund. So essentially, they can be used to fund any type of growth-related capital cost. So certainly, I put a list here on the top part of this slide. You can read sort of what we're considering for inclusion in the strategy. Some of this will be replacing things that can no longer be funded through the DCs, like parking. But certainly things like public realm improvements, public art, and I know you have policies already for installing public art, streetscaping. It can certainly be used for affordable housing, the acquisition and development of parks. In the Waterloo context, initiatives that are related to improving the station areas, like active transportation, Parkland elements. And then it can also be used to top up the development charge services as well. But remember too that this is still a charge that is imposed only on high density development. And so we can only include costs in the strategy that are going to benefit the people living in mid to high rise apartment buildings. So it's a little bit more scoped in that respect than the development charges. Next slide, please. Again, with the new structure, you have to go through a public consultation, although they don't regulate exactly how that's done, but we're going to proposing to follow the development charges framework there. There is a right of appeal to the land tribunal for this. And there are some accounting requirements. You have to establish a special account where all of the CBCs are pooled. You have to report annually on the transactions in that account. And importantly, you have to spend or allocate at least 60% of the funds in that account every year. And then last month, the government brought in another change to this that requires you to review this every 5 years as well. Next slide, please. There's a process now for calculating the charge, and I won't go into it in too much detail. Suffice to say, you've got to look at what kind of development you're anticipating in the future. You have to look at the need that the mid and high-rise apartments might require by way of services. You have to identify projects that are going to meet that need, and you have to look at the funding sources of those projects before you establish the actual charge in the bylaw. Next slide, please. We thought we just want to let you know what other municipalities are doing. So unlike the development charges, this will be, this CBC, it will really only be used in a small number of municipalities in Ontario, mainly those that have relied heavily on the old density bonusing in the past. So Toronto, Ottawa, Mississauga will need this revenue stream, certainly because they've made extensive use of those previous agreements. But certainly there are a number of municipalities here on the list that perhaps didn't use Section 37 too often, but are going to be imposing a CBC at some point this year. So we looked at the 15 sort of fastest growing, largest municipalities. 11 of those have used density bonusing in the past, and 10 of those are going to be implementing a CBC this year. There are a number of large municipalities, Kitchener, Whitby, Brantford, Peterborough, they've indicated that they're not going to proceed with one right now. They're adopting a sort of a wait and see approach, and don't really have the need to replace a lost revenue stream in the same way that some of the other places might. Next slide, please. In Waterloo's case, of course, you are planning for a lot of intensification and a lot of higher density development, and you will invariably be needing to provide the kinds of works that will be eligible for CBC funding. You will be losing the parking DC revenue, which brings in about $1.1 million a year. And you will be losing your Section 37 funds. And in the last decade, you've had either secured or had committed about $5 million from developers for that. And we estimate that the new CBC revenue could be anywhere between $340,000 and $483,000 per year, depending, of course, on how much mid to high-rise apartment development you get, and that in turn will depend upon decisions about the long-term growth prospects that are coming out of the regional land needs assessment work that's ongoing. So that range is there because there are still various options to be decided upon, and so we've kept the range there to give you a sense of what the upper end and the lower end could be depending on what option is chosen. But again, putting one in will be in line with what other municipalities are doing, especially the ones that have had density bonusing in the past and are growing very rapidly. But a reminder, of course, that this will be a charge that under the old scheme probably wouldn't have been paid by a lot of apartment buildings. So it would represent a new charge for a lot of these units. And of course, there is, of course, a right of appeal to OLT as well. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to finish up by talking about the third piece of work that we're doing. Next slide, please, which is, as I say, a sort of peer review of an update to the Parkland dedication bylaw. And as you all know, that the city, under the Planning Act, can secure parkland or cash in lieu of parkland from development. And there are standard rates set out in the legislation for securing that land. It's 2% of the site for a commercial or industrial site and 5% of the land for other uses. And there's also an opportunity to impose an alternative rate for residential development, up to 1 hectare per 300 units for land, and up to 1 hectare per 500 units if they're paying in cash. And there's been some changes to the way the alternative rate is applied. Next slide, please. So they're now there's a framework that requires that there be official plan policies that establish the need for parks and the use of an alternative rate. And you already have those policies, so those are being reviewed. You now need a parks plan to examine the need for parkland, and that is underway. And then the proposal, if you do continue with an alternative rate, the alternative rate again can be appealed to the OLT. And there are areas, there isn't one in the city right now, but there are areas that the province can designate as transit-oriented communities where this rate would be capped. So we don't have that designation yet in place. If it does come, it'll almost certainly be sort of around the LRT corridor, but that's up to the province to designate that. So next slide, please. Just wanted to finish up by speaking about sort of the sequencing of and scheduling. So the idea is that we would prepare a CBC strategy for release sometime in June, and hold a public meeting towards the end of June for feedback on the strategy and the Parkland bylaw. And then use the summer to consult with members of the local development construction industry on the CBC and the Parkland matters. with a view of bringing before council a CBC bylaw and an updated Parkland dedication bylaw by September the 19th to meet that transition date. And then we would leave the development charge study to later in the year and in the new year next year. So we would produce a background study towards the end of this year with a view of having a public consultation and council decisions about the development charge framework for the new council in the first quarter of 2023. So that's my presentation, Mr. Chairman. Of course, happy to answer any questions council may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. That was certainly extensive and detailed. I see a few questions up already. I'll turn it over to Mayor Jaworski first, then Councillor Hammer.
Thank you very much through the chair. So it really seems like we're deciding whether we want to be in that list of 10 communities that are going for CBC today, which seems self-evident to me with a community that's all about density. I did have a question regarding the current way we do DC bylaws. There's really two aspects to that. One is capturing the overall cost of what is needed for growth, and then allocating the distribution of the collection of them. For example, on one of the slides, it showed how on a 1-bedroom apartment, we collect $9,000. On a 2 to 3 bedroom apartment, we decide to collect $9,000 so that more family-oriented housing can be created. Yet with 4+ style dorm units, we want to dissuade them by collecting $22,000. I'm just wondering, does that play into the decision-making today, or the decision-making of the CBC? Or is it the last item you mentioned, which is the future discussion of DC, which is next term of council?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I think the differentiated charge between the unit types, that would really be a matter for the development charge study in the new year next year. And we certainly what we try and do with the background study is determine what the maximum charge could be under the current rate structure. But then, of course, you know, if council wants to change the rate structure or not impose the maximum charge, then there's a whole set of discussion about, you know, how best to implement the rates, who should pay what, and you know what policies need to be put into place to incentivize perhaps certain areas, development sectors. That can all happen after the background study is issued. And right now we're planning that would be done in, as I say, sort of the first quarter of 2023.
Okay, perfect. That's good, because I do think that new council will certainly have an interest in that. So I just say to staff that, you know, in as far as that those types of kind of push and pull kind of things can be useful, I think the next term of council will be interested in that. And then a more broader question, a more generic question on affordable housing. That is something that certainly council has helped out over the past few years by paying off the development charges for some affordable housing projects, notable affordable housing projects in the city of Waterloo. And it's really sort of a twist, the fact that we have to have development charges, but then when we have something really good come along, like affordable housing, we have to pay for them. And I'm just wondering, is there any thought or options in the new way of doing things that they can simply be, quote, waived, if you know what I mean?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, yes and no, I guess would be the answer. Is that, you know, we're certainly proposing through this process to look at opportunities to fund affordable housing, both through the development charges and through the community benefits charges. And a number of the other municipalities as well are using the CBCs to fund affordable housing. Of course, affordable housing can have benefits that accrue to everyone in the city. So, you know, there are limitations over the scale of funding we can direct that's funded directly from new development. But I think perhaps the second part of your question was also the extent to which, you can waive development charges for individual affordable housing developers. And of course, you can put exemptions into the bylaw that would exempt a category of development. It's sometimes a little trickier to provide one-off waivers. The development charges bylaw is a taxing bylaw, and so you have to be careful about the bonusing prohibitions in the Municipal Act when you're providing those sorts of waivers. I think that the best route for doing this is to craft some sort of discount or exemption policy in the bylaw, rather than doing one-off waivers, because there are some pitfalls with that. Not to say you can't, but it needs some care in approaching it.
Absolutely, fair enough. No, that sounds encouraging. I think that an example of where we would not have to worry about bonusing, where we traditionally have helped fund the development charges of not-for-profits, so charitable organizations, which obviously aren't corporations and that. But I would just say to staff that certainly I think this council and next term of council will be keenly interested in opportunities like that simplify and streamline things, but also don't get us caught in a hook for other things. But thank you very much. I'm done, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Next up, we have Councillor Hammer, and I'll certainly have some questions at the end. Go ahead, Councillor Hammer. I see more showing up.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Stefan, thank you very much for your very comprehensive review, and has me thinking about lots of things. One, I did have a few questions around affordable housing. However, the mayor has asked those, so I'm comfortable with the responses, and I appreciate the advice. I'm taking it as a little bit of advice on how we might want to look at not really modifications, but to use the mayor's words, waiving of charges. The more we can be consistent in how we approach it and predictable is something for us to consider for sure. I am curious though, earlier on in your slides, you talked about the CBCs being able to be applied to buildings or the apartments that were 5 stories or more, or a certain number of units. And I'm just trying to understand how they may be applied to developments where there's a combination of towers, which may or may not be 5 stories. They could be 6, they could be more than 5 stories, but also townhouses or stacked townhouses. And so is it only the apartment building complex that would be considered, or is it the entire development on the property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a very good question. And I'm not sure that I can give a definitive answer. The wording in the legislation relates to buildings. So I suppose that if it was a complex of several buildings, each building would, my initial reaction would be that each building would be treated as a sort of standalone piece. And if it met the 5 stories and 10 units, then it would be eligible. But there may be some permutations to that are specific to Waterloo that I may not be appreciating there, and we may have to sort of look into that a little more detail.
Thank you, Stefan, for that. I would appreciate it, and it may be more a question to staff to consider it. As I'm specifically thinking of some of the areas within my own ward where we are doing a combination of townhouses, and I can think in Ward 3 the same thing, townhouses and then one larger apartment building that is in sort of the same complex. So definitely encouraging families to be part of it, and so would be looking to other kinds of amenities like parks and things like that to be supported. So I'd be curious, I'd appreciate understanding that a little bit more as we go through the process. So thank you. Chair, that's it for me.
Yes, and I think that was a good question, Councillor Hammer. I think just for further edification on that, as Stefan, you and staff sort of take that back for further reporting. We certainly have developments. There's one in Westvale in Councillor Hammer's ward with 2 towers and a connected podium structure at the north end, parking in the center, and at the south end, a stacked town complex, where I think by your building's definition, those are probably distinct, unless they share an underground parking structure, in which case it's one build in some ways. And then we've got some historic developments and probably some similar ones in Uptown, just near City Hall, where you had street-facing towns enjoined, onto the podium of a tower and podium structure. And we've got some approvals that are historic of buildings not yet built for which that would qualify. So we do have multiple typologies of that kind of mix. But it sounds to you like this is one of those great legal questions that will need clarity from the province, and no doubt will be litigated in some fashion by developers to the extent that regulations allow. I'll go to Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Stefan, or for staff, but a couple. I'm sort of curious about what the financial pressures this is going to be putting onto the city. I guess my first question, though, will be, one of the things that you noted was that within this new CBC bylaw, that the requirements are that 60%, or the requirements are that they be spent or allocated within the year. Can you maybe expound on that and give me a little bit of information about how the city has done on that sort of target or requirement now in the past? Are we doing that already, or is this going to be a pressure where we're going to have to be spending or allocating this money? We're going to have to be paying more attention to that.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, and staff may want to add to my answer here, but certainly this is a fairly new requirement. You don't have the same kind of requirements for the management of the development charge reserve funds. And I guess when this first came out, it did create a bit of angst amongst municipalities, but I think the realization now is that the important word is the word allocate, and so I think this will need regular attention to manage this account, but most municipalities would say, well, we're either going to spend this or allocate it or reallocate it. So there may be a sort of an annual exercise of identifying where things are going to go, but inevitably priorities change, and some, there is some long-term planning and long-term fund buildup that's required for some of these projects, and so it may be that the allocation and reallocation exercise is a bigger piece than actually spending the money on an annual basis. And I think Philippa wanted to add something as well there.
Yes, thank you, Stefan, and Chair Henry, through to Councillor Bodley. Just to add on to the piece that Councillor Bodley asked about the financial impact, I mean, it's obviously early days with regards to the CDC, but in the, I'm looking at the slide number, one of the slides that we had up, that Stefan had up about the potential CBC revenue, and looking at what is required to replace there, the comparison there, it's not linear, but if you were to take sort of an average by year between Section 37 and the parking DC revenue that we have received historically is about $1.5 million per year, and the current potential range for the CDC is in the range of 340 to 483. So at this point in time, I would say that the financial impact is that there will be a reduction in revenue at this point in time for what we're forecasting.
Right. Thank you for the answer. The first part of the allocation and spending question. Yeah, just to go further through you, Chair Henry, on the financial impact. Yeah, that's sort of what I was getting at here, I guess, is it looks like we're probably foregoing about $1.6 million a year, and we are at best around $500,000. So costing the city $1 to $1.1 million. Presumably, that my question was going to be, presumably we spend this money, and presumably the pressures that are going to be created by this new bylaw are going to be felt. We're not going to be able to magically not spend this money. And so I just wanted to clarify that, because presumably, again, this means that we're putting, we're taking funding that we would traditionally have received from the development community and ultimately asking taxpayers to fund the gap there. And so given that, and please correct me if I'm wrong there, but given that, are there considerations within this bylaw or within the DC bylaw to try and narrow, with the forthcoming DC bylaw update next term of council, to narrow that gap? Or are we prescribed by these bylaws and already sort of taking the maximum that we can take? Some thoughts on why or how we're getting to this 340 to 483 here, and whether or not we'll be able to make any more of that up through the future DC bylaw, or we won't be able to. Thoughts on that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we will certainly look at that. And I suspect that there may be some opportunities now that you can fund 100% of the so-called soft services, the parks, recreation, libraries, some other services as well. With that additional authority to collect 100% of the charge, you may be able to close that gap through that mechanism. But I don't, and this is off the top of my head, I don't think we're going to be able to close the full $1 million difference, give or take, with any changes to the DCs next year.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to put that out there for future term of council, because presumably we're going to attempt to increase this, or at least one of the options on the table for the DC bylaw next term will be to increase this. And I suspect that there will be pushback from the development community. But the reality is that there's this new format is causing us this pressure. So just food for thought, something for myself and future council colleagues to consider. That's it for me, Chair Henry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley. And I noticed primarily the shifting of parking from out of DC eligible to DC ineligible that is causing that gap. I mean, the vast majority of Section 37 is happening in Northdale, and it's a bit more ad hoc and fluid. Anyways, I say that to note that it appears this government believes that only people in mid to high-rise apartments will park or die as they're coming into our community here in Waterloo. I find that interesting, and surely calls into question some of government thinking around logic behind all of this, but it is a logic with which we have to deal. So, Stefan, on that, I wanted to ask about your nexus test on that exact point. If let's say, as a percentage of our overall development, about half would be in structures that would be CBC eligible. Given our 80% intensification rate and our significant mid to high-rise apartment, context around that, that seems like a reasonable ballpark, number. About half of our growth might be eligible for CBC. What does the nexus test sort of do to this? Like, if we think we have a project for like a $10 million parking structure, do we say, well, 5 million of that we can collect through CBC, but not the other half because it's only half of our growth? And is there a factor in there for recognizing in our zoning bylaws that these mid to high rise, units are happening in nodes and corridors in transit-oriented development communities where we have applied specifically a discounted parking rate that will probably get deeper over time to recognize that these are areas where we hope and expect that not everybody needs a car, and therefore not everybody would need to park in public parking. So I'm just wondering if you can give me a sense of how that nexus test might work, recognizing when you come back to us, you'll be able to do more.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's quite a lot there, obviously. You know, I think that there's two tests that we'll have to apply to these projects. The first will be a test we apply to the DC projects, which is the extent to which, for example, a parking structure is going to benefit development versus the extent to which it's going to benefit the residents who are already living in the city. So that'll be the first test. And then the second one is the one that you're alluding to, which is, well, if it's benefiting just development, what portion of the cost is going to benefit the development that's actually paying the CBC, the mid to high rise apartments. And I think that the logic you're applying there is perfectly reasonable. And I would imagine that we're going to come up with something along those lines, which is, you know, the number of units that are CBC eligible versus the number of new units altogether across the city, something like that. There may be one or two projects where we can demonstrate that the need is being driven by the apartments alone. And we can certainly, the strategy will lay out exactly what those projects are. But certainly there will be some projects where I think it's going to be difficult to say that it's just the apartments driving the need.
No, thanks. That's helpful, because I've looked at that as a bit of a, you know, a moral conundrum. Makes it sound a bit grander than it actually is. So that's not quite the right word, but the sense that folks who are living in the structures that provide, you know, ways of living and getting around that don't require a car would be the only ones able to continue to fund parking for all the folks who are living in places where cars are a dependency, and one of the few choices out there. Doesn't quite sit right with me. And if there's some to be recovered through general taxation, well, now there's double counting, because you're paying for your property taxes and you're paying the CBC if you're in the mid to high rise, but not if you're in one of our green fields in a single or semi or town. So those are some of the more, you know, policy related questions that I grapple with when I think of this being the only way to recover, you know, parking revenue for those kinds of things. And I think that there's a bigger question about what capital projects we should even have in our forecast around parking if we're trying to make a general shift. But those are all for another day. I wanted to get back to I think the mayor's question around affordable housing and your notes around waivers being the cleanest way to do that. I just wanted to clarify and confirm, if we were to have a DC bylaw which had a policy in there that would, you know, by policy waive DCs for affordable housing, however defined, are those funds then effectively lost? Do we have to recover them from another source, or can they be, you know, can the missing funds from there be sort of tacked on to the general DC base and covered by all the other units? Like, in other words, is this a cost or is it a redistribution from going through a waiver project? Because that has budget impact and challenges for us to manage too.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's a cost. So any discount or exemption or waiver, whatever you want to call it, the value of that cannot be passed on as a higher charge on other forms of development. So there is a financial impact on the tax base of providing any kind of exemption.
Thank you. That's what I thought it was. I just wasn't sure if it had changed, and I wanted to make sure my colleagues in hearing your response didn't hope that it had changed to something different than it had been. The last question I had was around the public engagement around CBC. I noted that you've got industry consultations that you planned between yourself and Michael. I was wondering if you could comment on what consultation is planned for the community that would benefit from these charges. We're obviously considering a number of different things we could fund through the CBC, you know, strategy, but a limited pool of funds that we would actually be able to generate. So there's probably going to be some choices to make around that. So I'm wondering if your staff could speak to how we're going to consult with the, you know, broader non-development community around what benefits we should be focusing on, given what we're able to recover and what we're not.
So Michael may want to chime in here as well, but I think the idea is that we would want to hold a public meeting, and that would be our first consultation on the strategy. You know, given the summer, we wanted to try and ensure that a public meeting was held sometime in June, and it's going to have to be sort of towards the end of June. And that, you know, that will give us our first sense, I think, of what the broader reception is to this new charge and new bylaw. And then that would leave the summer to perhaps follow up on, you know, more detailed questions that some in the development industry might also have. But I think also that, you know, we're certainly open to meeting with other groups as well, and we would leave that to staff to determine, you know, the most appropriate, you know, forum and ways to do that. But we're certainly open to that.
Thanks. Michael, anything to add there?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Chair Henry. To you regarding the process, and as Stefan mentioned, there's going to be industry consultation, and that's more for the mechanics and the process of the CBC strategy and whatnot, similar to the DC background studies. I think kind of what you're talking about is more of the public engagement process, like the kind of how we do for the budget public engagement. You know, soliciting input on what's important, what is a community benefit, things like that. And just to note that these CBC funded projects per se will be, they're high level at this point, but as we get closer to funding them, they'll be kind of a non-routine in nature. So it would be going back to council before any funding is released, similar to how the projects kind of nowadays are, where you provide an overview of what's happening. But there's going to be further dialogue and kind of a prioritization matrix that's going to go through the budget committee as well, as noted in the report. But I think there will be that dialogue and the public engagement process as we're budgeting for these over the next few budgets. So I think that's kind of what you're alluding to. But the industry consultation is similar to the DC process, where they're reviewing forecast population statistics, you know, what's the mix of unit mix and things like that. Not necessarily they're not necessarily interested on what the actual project is per se, but as long as it's eligible and within the constraints of the CBC legislation. So just hopefully that helps.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I mean, there's always opportunities to engage to be able to get folks to sort of offer some input for reports that come back on the mix. But I take the broader point around, you know, forecast, you know, growth typologies by type and the rest of those, which I think separate from this, we are all going to have a lot deeper and broader conversations region-wide over the next weeks and months as the land use assessment moves forward. And I'd hope that whatever growth decisions that are sort of made in that process are really how we're building the DC background study. And because certainly the last one forecasted that we would be building, you know, singles till the cows come home, but that's not what we're doing in Waterloo. It's not what we have been doing. It's not what we're going to be doing. So certainly a realistic land needs assessment update in the DC will be necessary, and I will be as interested as the developers will be on what that mix is, but maybe differently interested. So with that, I think we've run through questions, and I see people looking to get ready to move the motion. So if there's no further questions, I see the mayor is inclined to move it with enthusiasm. Is there a seconder? That would be Councillor Bodley. If there's no comments, then I'll go to the vote. I'll thank our presenters and go to the vote, starting with Ward 1.
Councillor Hammer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Mayor Jaworski in favor.
And the chair is in favor, so that carries. We'll go off and do some work, and then we'll be back. Up next, staff report item B, 8B, allocation of 2021 surplus. So there's a recommendation before us and a very extensive report. Are there any questions from council for Mr. Hodinga? Seeing no questions, I'll look to the mayor for a comment.
Well, thank you very much to Finance for putting this report together. I think it's clear that the investment by the federal and provincial governments in our COVID relief really did the trick at our level. So our thanks go to the federal and provincial governments on that. And thanks for the allocation appropriately of the surplus, which would not exist. We would be in a deficit if it wasn't for the thanks or the funding we received from the upper levels of government.
Indeed. I see Councillor Freeman willing to move the motion. Is there a seconder? Seconded from Councillor Bonagor. We'll start the vote down in Ward 1.
Councillor Hammer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vassic in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Mayor Jaworski in favor.
And the chair is in favor, so that carries. So that's last year. How about this year? Well, we have the financial impact of COVID-19 update report number 7 and 2022 Q1 surplus deficit projection prepared by Paul Hodinga and Brad Whitsell. Are there questions from council on this report? Seeing none, let me ask just quickly of staff. Clearly we've got some assumptions here. We've got some actuals from Q1, and we've got some assumptions about what the remaining 3 quarters will look like to drive a COVID deficit of about $2.6 million, which we can't fully offset with existing senior government funding. I think the biggest lever here is around recreation revenue and whether we hit that target, whether we're above, whether we're below. I'm wondering if staff have looked at it from a sensitivity perspective, right? So if we're at 90% utilization, if we're at 5% higher or 5% lower utilization, what does that translate to in the bottom line? So because I look at that as if everything is great and people are coming back like it's 2019. Things could look better than this, but if we get into some more bumps along the road, it could look worse. So I was wondering if we had, on a sensitivity basis, any sense of what that would do to our bottom line in our projection here.
Through you, Chair Henry, it's Brad here. I can take a stab at that one. I don't necessarily think we have a dollar value on that sensitivity analysis. We have done extensive modeling on the recreation side, which you have noted. And you've quickly stated some of the assumptions that are in play. And in addition to being able to remain open, there's the other factor of customers' comfort level and willingness to return to the programs that are being offered. But we have taken a fairly cautious approach at this point. But what we're going to do is continue to monitor that and provide updates to council. But the point the mayor made earlier around having $8.84 million in total federal provincial COVID support, with 1.7 being able to be rolled into 2022 does set us up into a pretty good place. There's ongoing advocacy for ongoing COVID support in 2022. So the Ontario Big City Mayors Group that the mayor is a part of has been continuing that dialogue, and if that was to come to fruition, that would be great. Alternatively, we would likely be looking at a draw from the tax rate stabilization reserve, currently around 1 million. So, at this stage, it is based on Q1 actuals, so things can change. Hopefully, maybe a little bit to the better, but we'll provide a next update in September for council. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Brad, and certainly crossing our fingers is helpful that we'll end up better and not needing to draw from tax rate stab, as senior government support has, allowed us not to throughout the pandemic so far. But of course, that is what it's there for. It is a rainy day. It's been raining for some time, I think, on this. So that's understandable. Seeing no further questions here, I'll look for a mover and seconder for this item as well. Seeing Councillor Vassic move. And Councillor Veith second. We'll start. Are there any comments, Council? Seeing and hearing none, we'll go down to Ward 1 again to start the vote.
Councillor Hammer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Mayor Jaworski in favor.
And the chair is in favor, so that carries. Takes us to item D, the 2021 review of museum operations, prepared by Karen Vandenbrink. And Karen has a presentation for us and a video you can watch at your leisure another time. Go ahead when you're ready, Karen.
Good afternoon. Sorry, can everyone hear me? I was not able to perform a check earlier.
You sound good over here, Karen.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. May is Museum Month, which coincides with coming up this week, International Museum Day on May 18th, which is a worldwide initiative of the International Council of Museums. And International Museum Day was celebrated for the first time 40 years ago. All around the world, more and more museums participate in International Museum Day. May is Museum Month and is an opportunity to celebrate the contributions of museums to their communities and to kick off the 22 summer tourism season, which I think we'll actually get to this year. The City of Waterloo Museum plays a meaningful role in creating community connections by collecting and sharing stories that can help unite us. The past 2 years, the City of Waterloo Museum team has watched the calls to action from our community on the topics of diversity and inclusion. Local events in 2021 intensified the gaps in our local fabric, and the background of the pandemic has amplified this need to change. The potential of our museum to create meaningful experiences for people of all origins and backgrounds is central to our social value and ability to remain relevant. As agents of change, there is no time like the present for us to demonstrate our relevance by engaging constructively in the political, social, and cultural realities of modern society. The challenges of inclusion and diversity and the difficulty of navigating complex social issues is increasingly polarizing environments are important ones, and as a municipally operated museum, we need to be included in the work that can be done by the city to help unite us. An increasing public expectation for social change has catalyzed a conversation around museums in general as a potential for social good in the form of exhibitions, collections, programs, and other initiatives created. This past year, the museum staff started this work with organizing a program focused on collecting stories and building relationships with the local Rainbow community. Members from the University of Waterloo's Glow Center and Spectrum worked with the museum staff and presented the first in our region walking tour, focusing on the history and contributions in our community of the LGBTQ movement at the University of Waterloo. However, there were still many more stories to gather, and we are continuing the momentum. So this year in 2022, an oral history project is currently underway that will serve as foundational research to collecting and building relationships to better represent our local stories. The Hear Our Stories podcast is the first of this year's capstone projects for the Masters of Museum Studies program that I've had the distinct honor of putting together in partnership with the University of Toronto. The project began as an oral history initiative meant to collect histories from the 2S LGBTQ+ community in KW to improve and enrich the museum's collection. But the 3 students took it a step further by turning it into a public podcast series. Some of our guests include comedians and performers from Rainbow Reels, a two-spirit trans femme woman from the Landback camp, a local journalist, and a teen queer interviewee that haven't seen each other in 25 years since the former interviewed the latter in the 90s, and Black queer anti-racism advocates. I don't want to spoil too much, so I hope this was enough of a teaser to start building the anticipation as we gear up to start publishing our episodes in Pride Month of 2022. And while these episodes are certainly not exhaustive of the work or the many queer voices in KW and Waterloo region, we hope that we've contributed to the work that has been and is currently being done in the region to platform this community. The information collected from this project will expand our understanding and guide future work at the museum in the areas of exhibitions, programming, collecting, education, and research. The museum staff has acknowledged the disparities that exist in our local colonial storytelling and collection. These disparities relate to many topics, including ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation and identity, physical ability, etc. Our call to action is to better represent this community and be part of the change to seek out and tell the quiet stories of our past and platform different community members. I hope you were able to watch our video presentation ahead of this report, as you can see the many things that our team put together in 2021. And so with that, I thank you, and we're looking forward with optimism this year to an exciting 2022.
Thank you, Karen, for that review. Councillor Veith has some comments.
Thank you, Karen. Through you, Chair Henry. Thanks for the report. I always love getting these reports, and I hope that all of my colleagues watched the video. That's the first thing I did when I got the report, and citizens as well, because it's amazing what you guys have done over the past 2 years, with most of the time the doors being closed to the museum. So, and I have participated in a couple of those fun events. So, yeah, I'm a big fan, and so I just want to thank you for all your work and all the work your staff and your volunteers do to keep the museum busy. Thanks.
And Councillor Bonagor.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. I just wanted to say thank you as well to Karen and the team. The website catalogue is fascinating. I went kind of randomly skipping through the collection a couple of times and stumbled across some strange and interesting things. But I also wanted to just say that while the museum is located at at Conestoga Mall, I just wanted to say the presence of the museum has really been felt uptown. So, with your Show Me the City history snapshots and the stories of Waterloo Park, they were fantastic. So thank you for kind of doing what you could to bring the museum to us as well. I think it was really effective and really powerful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So this one we just received for information. So we'll move to the City of Waterloo Museum Policy Review. So there's nothing related here, but I'm sure Karen and Travis are available for any questions that folks have. Are there any questions that folks have on Museum Policy Review? Seeing none, I just comment, Karen. I know how much work this process has been, and it's clearly been to the good. What you noted in your previous report around COVID recovery grants under the museum category demonstrates that we've made it. All of the work that's been done to get the policies in order, the practices in order, and the work that your team has done over the years to get us there has enabled the kind of recognition that has helped during the pandemic, and no doubt will help further the museum's mission and the support that it provides to a community in knowing and understanding itself. So thank you for all the work that's gone into these and the continual improvement that we're making as we're learning new things. I'll look for a mover and seconder for these wonderfully updated policies, and the ability to repeal policies at the same time is a twofer here. Who'd like to move them? Moved by Councillor Veith, seconded by Councillor Vasek. There we go. I feel like I should be auctioning off moves and seconds there with that kind of lead-in. Instead, we'll just start down in Ward 1 for the vote.
Councillor Hammer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasek in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Mayor Jaworski in favor.
The chair is in favor as well, so that carries, team. Next up, we have award of RFP 21-25 for the design and construction of storage buildings at Rim Park and Fire Station number 1. There is no presentation on this item now today, Council, as you can see on the screen. Are there any questions on this item? Certainly extensive detail from the team that is I think taking a very thorough approach to Council's direction during budget time to take a solid look at storage needs and come up with an appropriate plan, and lots of work clearly underway in that regard. Councillor Vasic has a question. Go ahead, Councillor Vasic.
Thanks through you, Chair Henry. Okay, I was just hoping that finance staff could, I know that it's in there, but I wasn't quite clear on it, and I sent, anyways. So I'm just hoping you can help me better understand the finance piece of this and where the money is coming from.
Who would like to take that in finance land?
Hi, Councillor Henry. This is Philippa here. I can take a stab at this.
Go ahead.
So as the report notes, this is to Councillor Vasic, as the report notes, the additional funding will be committed through the next development charge bylaw as a different development charge reserve specific to the actual storage needs at Rim Park. What was originally budgeted was for a different reserve fund within Public Works, which is not applicable to this particular piece. And in addition, there's some incremental addition to the fire storage piece as well. So there's two components. There's a little bit more money being added for the fire storage from development charges from that particular reserve. And there is also an additional development charge funding request here for the Rim Park storage piece, which was not originally budgeted for in the last capital budget that you would have seen. So this is the commitment to recover that from the development charge bylaw that Stefan was speaking about earlier today, that will be coming forward to council later. And hopefully that helps clear that up, but please let me know if you have any further questions on that.
Thank you. That is helpful. And I think I'm not totally clear yet. So, or I just still have concerns, I guess, just because it's a big amount. So do we have any concerns that the additional piece that's being asked for here, do we have concerns given we know that we may be sort of looking at less money for community benefit charges? Or do we not have concerns about that at all? And yeah, that's my question.
Through you, Councillor Henry, to Councillor Vasic. This will not impact community benefit charges in that it is exclusively a development charge service. So it will impact the DC rates and the DC capital program, and that we will be attaching this project into the capital program for consideration that will then in turn, translate into rate impacts. But it will not directly impact the CBC. They're distinct, and we wouldn't be looking to achieve this type of project work with the CBC.
Right. Sorry. And so we're not worried about this with the DC rates and charges and study in the fall at all. This is really sort of it's not separate, but is it separate in some way, or how can we be? I just want to be confident about this, that it doesn't seem like you have any concerns that this will have too substantial of an impact. Am I understanding that right?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Vasic, that's correct. We are obviously going to be taking this into account with all of our other capital needs from the development charges study that will be reviewed as we, pursue. But this individual ask, given the monetary amount, it's absolutely significant, as you say, but not necessarily unusual with regard to the various capital projects that are required to support growth. And so at this stage, we feel confident that this can be built into the study. Council has done this type of approval in the past to build in future development charges for a timing related project. And so the intention is to proceed with this, but to budget for it within the DC study coming up. And we don't see any challenges at this point in being able to do that, as well as the other priorities that are going to be coming forward to support the growth and development. So this is one project, absolutely, but there will be various others that will be coming forward. And at this stage, we feel that it's reasonable to move forward with it. But obviously, council should discuss this more and debate it as you wish.
No, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. That provides me with enough information. Oh, sorry, Michael, you can add if you want.
Sorry, through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Vasic. So yeah, just a bit of context. So what we're asking right now is to approve the money and fund the money now, but there's that specific wording that council has to commit it to the next bylaw. Otherwise, we can't collect it from DC rates in the future. So yes, all else equal, it will increase DC rates marginally by that additional few $100,000 there. But it's just an administrative thing. We did it with Columbia Street in the past. We needed more money to do the project at that time. But if council isn't committed for the next DC bylaw, then we would be spending the money now and not able to recover it through DC rates in the future. Just that recommendation is a little bit, you don't see it often, but that's just what happens when you need to approve a DC project outside of the DC background study process, which it's a few months off. So that's just why that's there.
Okay, thanks. That is helpful too. Thanks so much to the both of you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, do we have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved by Councillor Hammer, seconded by Councillor Freeman. Are there any further comments, Council? Seeing none, we'll start in Ward 1.
Councillor Hammer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley, in favor.
Councillor Veith, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, in favor.
Councillor Vasic, in favor.
Councillor Bonagor, in favor.
Mayor Jaworski, in favor.
And the chair is in favor, so that carries. Before getting to the next item, I'm going to let anybody listening know that we do have a formal public meeting on the agenda today. And if you would like to speak at the public planning meeting later today on 99 to 107 Rogers Street holding removal, please call the clerk's office at 519-747-8705 to be added to the list of delegations. Okay. So that brings us to item G, Westside Employment Land Sale, Block 12. There's no presentation here, just a motion to take the money. Are there any questions here for Mr. McFadden? Seeing one from Councillor Bonagor. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Through you, Chair. Justin, just a quick question. I noticed that the valuation was from 2020. I know residential land has been volatile. I don't keep as close an eye on commercial land or employment land. So I'm just given the different pressures, does the valuation that we have before it, does it still stand in good stead?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bonagor. Thanks for the question. Certainly, so this process has taken, I guess, almost 2 years to work through with the region, and this was the price that we had kind of worked from, if you will, at that point in time. Certainly, maybe not quite to the extent that we've seen in residential, but all real estate has seen a bit of a shift, including industrial. So this land probably is slightly undervalued in terms of kind of where it would be at this point in time. But I think similar to how we've worked with other deals, kind of once we sort of formally agree on the price, even though it's taken us this long to bring it forward, we generally kind of stick with that. And certainly as we're working with a partner at the region, the decision was made to kind of bring this forward. But it is, as we bring additional lands forward, you will probably see higher prices per acre.
Okay, thank you. That's exactly what I was wondering. Thank you so much.
And now to the ward councillor, Councillor Bodley. Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. Just understanding that the design guidelines for the West Side Employment Lands have already been approved. We're still waiting on approving the marketing package for the West Side Employment Lands, as well as some sustainable development guidelines or requirements for the land. Can you advise whether or not the region will be subject to any of those planning documents that are already completed and or in the hopper there? Feedback on perhaps it's not even feasible given the usage that they're looking at, but how this sort of ties to especially the forthcoming sustainable development guidelines. I'd like some feedback on that. Thanks.
Yes. So technically, through you, Councillor Bodley, so technically, because we are going to be selling these lands now, and we'll probably have an agreement wrapped up in the next month or so with the region, technically they would not be included in those future requirements that we're about to bring forward on sustainable design goals. They would be subject to the design guidelines that we have in place, however, but the sustainable design requirements that we're going to bring forward likely in the early fall, they would technically not be subject to that because the lands would already be in their possession and we would be controlling that development through future sales.
Understood, and understood the sort of process that's been in place for some period of time over the last couple of years that would have precluded us from being able to perhaps put that as a condition of the sale here. But just for clarity, is it feasible or could we at least, excuse me, highly encourage the region to look at these forthcoming documents, and given the fact that they're a partner, perhaps even share those in advance before they're approved, just for knowledge sharing and perhaps consideration as they look to build out the site? Is that something we could do?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Yep, we can share those with the region and ask that to the best of their ability they follow kind of what we're trying to do here. This land will be kind of closed off from the park from an access perspective, so it will be accessed through their existing piece, so it won't necessarily be visible that it's part of the park. It won't be functionally part of the park once the sale goes through. But it's certainly something that we can ask the region to support as we go forward.
That's great. Thanks, Justin. I appreciate that. It's more of an extension of a current piece of the land that's been occupied for some time now, so it's not exactly the same. So I appreciate that, but sharing it would also be appreciated. So thank you for that, Justin. That's it for me, Chair Henry.
Thank you. And Mayor Jaworski, I see you on my speakers list.
That's just your movers list, not your speakers list.
It doesn't say move, it just says after questions. I'm not sure what you wanted to do with that, but if you'd like to move it, that is fine by me, and somebody can second it. That would be Councillor Bodley. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Looking for the vote starting down in Ward 1.
Councillor Hammer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Mayor Jaworski in favor.
And the chair is in favor, so that carries. That takes us to item 9, public meetings. And we do indeed have a formal public meeting, and therefore I have a script. It has been amended slightly. It may be shorter. We will see. So this is a formal public meeting to consider. Zoning bylaw amendment Z-21-11, holding removal application, part of 99 to 107 Roger Street, Reed's Heritage Homes. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should contact the planner, John Voss, at 519-747-8527, or at john.voss@waterloo.ca, spelled as JOHN.VOS@waterloo.ca. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the date notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the KW Record on April 29th, 2022, as well as the Waterloo Chronicle on May 5th, 2022, and mailed or emailed on April 26th, 2022, to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property and to all public agencies. An informal public meeting was not held, and I will correct that to say the record. Thank you.
Thank you. The planner, John Voss, will now give a brief overview of the application. When you are ready, John.
Thank you, Chair Henry. I do not have a presentation today. My recommendations are contained in the staff report, again recommending that council approve the application. But glad to be available to respond to any council questions.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for Mr. Voss? The ward councillor does, and so she can go ahead. Go ahead, Councillor Bonagor.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. Thanks, John, for your report. I just have a few questions for you. The report talks about the site plan committee conditionally supporting the proposal. I just want to confirm for any residents who are listening, does the current plan meet both the urban design guidelines and the site-specific directives that were included in 2018 when this was approved by the previous council?
Through Councillor Henry to Councillor Bonagor, staff have reviewed the detailed plans and the drawings and confirmed that they do satisfy the urban design guidelines fully and also council's directives from the 2018 approval. This includes matters such as incorporating local materials, considering the local character, compatibility with adjacent properties, streetscapes, site circulation, safety, security, outdoor lighting, amenities, etc. It also includes a requirement that 50% of the units contain at least 2 bedrooms and assurance that the public will have access to the new park. That'll be a private park adjacent to Roger and Moore. So we reviewed all of these details and confirmed that they do indeed comply with the urban design manual and also council's directives.
Excellent. That's really helpful. Thank you. I did have another question. Just, I was looking back at the 2018 report and sorry, I'm just going to turn off that phone. At the time, staff recommended that the development include a transition in the townhouse size as it progressed along Roger Street. And I think the recommendation that staff had put forward was to have a two-stack of townhouses, so 4 units beside the park, transitioning to a 4-stack containing 8 units, and then a 6-stack containing 12 units closer to Moore. But the current plan looks like it's got 2 6-stacks next to each other. So rather having 2, 4, and then 6, it's got 6 and 6. Am I reading these correctly? Is that correct?
there may have been, Councillor Henry to Councillor Bonagor, there may have been some overall shifting in how the units are laid out with the size of each block. But in general, the same massing and the same intent of land uses within specific sections, such as having townhouses along Roger and Moore and the apartment buildings pulled further back into the site, that overall objective has been maintained.
Okay, and with those kind of shifts on the broader lot, is it planning's consideration that this still does meet that idea of transitioning along the roadway there, not just front to back within the lot, but also kind of as you progress down the road?
Through Councillor Henry to Councillor Bonagor, yes, the intent is still maintained. The actual heights of the units and the depths are rather consistent, but it's more just the transition in throughout the site, and also then to provide the option for the parks to operate. So that has provided that breakup of unit size.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. My last question for you is just this was passed back in 2018, and the process is about to go in, like, should this proceed today, it'll go into site plan, which can be a little bit opaque. So I'm just wondering if you could explain how residents can keep up to date on the project and how they can find out about how plans are going as they progress.
Sure. Through Councillor Henry to Councillor Bonagor, the residents are always welcome to contact the Planning Division for an update on any development that's proceeding through site plan. Although site plan isn't a public process, we're happy to share the plans either at the counter by coming into City Hall and viewing the plans, or by viewing them virtually through a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting. So unfortunately, we can't provide them by email, but we're glad to walk through and show the plans virtually or in person. So we'd be glad to set that up with anyone if they're interested to see the plans, and also just to give an update on the status of any applications that are going forward.
Perfect. And to do that, they just need to walk into
They can call City Hall or they can walk right in.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's all from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, I go on with my script. As a reminder, if any person watching would like to receive further notice of this application, you can contact John Voss at 519-747-8527 or at john.voss@waterloo.ca, spelled as JOHN.VOS@waterloo.ca. If you would like to speak at the meeting, please call the clerk's office at 519-747-8705. This is the part in my script where I say I will now call upon any registered delegations to speak. I note that we have two delegations that are registered with us, Rachel and Jeff, but I understand both are here to answer questions of council and but don't have any comments that they are inclined that they need to make at this time. If I'm incorrect, I'm sure they'll let me know. Are there any questions of our delegates representing Leeds Heritage Homes and their planner? I see questions from the ward councillor, so go ahead, Councillor Bonagor, and we'll make sure that our delegates can respond.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry, to the delegates, thank you for being here today. This is a really important intensification project, and I know it's a lot of the neighbours and nearby residents, they support intensification, and they were supportive of intensifying this location, but it's a long project. So if I thought I would just leap at the chance while I have you here at the meeting to kind of ask a couple of broader questions. You know, I have been receiving some emails and calls from residents in the neighbourhood area, and there's a range of issues that seem to be coming up, ranging from large trucks going down residential streets rather than the truck routes, work vehicles kind of speeding along residential streets. There's reports of damage to homes, crews starting earlier and working later than they should be, trucks blocking the only sidewalk on Rogers Street, and prolonged periods of truck idling on the location. Now, residents understand that a construction project does bring impact, but they're having trouble getting resolutions for these matters. So I'm just wondering if you could, first of all, if there's a way to try and help residents through these issues, and maybe speak to crews and site supervisors just to kind of help make sure that we're all being good neighbours, that would be great. But I was just wondering if you could maybe let any residents who are listening know, or I can happily pass the information along. Who should residents be reaching out to if they have kind of issues or concerns beyond the matters before us today, but more broadly with what's happening at the development site?
It feels like a question for you, Mr. Robinson, but either of you go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Henry. It's Jeff Robinson with Reed's Heritage Homes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bonagor, thank you for the questions, and I think I can address a few of them and certainly assist you and some of the neighborhood residents a little bit. In regards to the truck route, I'll start with that. That is something that was established prior to construction. We do have an approved truck route for accessing the site, and it has been in place since we started construction. We have also gotten a couple of calls at times reporting that trucks have not adhered to that. We've had subsequently several on-site meetings with our site staff, including with our contractors, to again review the truck route plan and make sure they adhere to that. We've also, Councillor, implemented some new signage on site to try to make it abundantly clear for the contractors and site staff of that truck route, and which direction trucks are to be traveling and which direction they're not to be traveling. So I do think these measures will certainly assist with that. We're obviously open at any time to hearing any should any issues arise or complaints from city staff or from residents. They can reach out to us. We do have a dedicated email address for this property. There's also a concierge email address on our website, reedsheritagehomes.com, which can also be used for asking questions regarding this project. Maybe I'll move a little bit to parking, Councillor. I do know that has been one of the challenges with this site, given it's in an existing neighborhood and the number of site staff and trades that are working on the site. Parking can be at a bit of a premium at times. We've been working through a parking plan with city staff from both development engineering and from transportation, whereby going forward, any site staff or contractor staff would actually need to obtain a parking permit or a parking pass from the city, which would identify areas in which those site staff and contractors can park, and hours in which they can park there. And I certainly see this as a good solution to accommodating the parking and making it very clear to both contractors, our site staff, and as well to area residents of where the permitted parking is for staff of this site.
Okay, that's appreciated. Just regarding the the email addresses that you have, that you mentioned before, residents said they're not getting responses from them. So can I just ask that you perhaps just check that email address is working okay? There just seems to be an issue where residents are reporting these things but are not hearing back. So perhaps it's an issue of whose inbox it's going to.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. We will double check that to make sure that those are being received and responded to as quickly as possible.
That's great. Thank you. And just to follow on from that, I mean, the project was approved in 2018. And as I was saying with staff just now, that the next stage is site plan, which can be a bit opaque and it's sort of largely out of view. And as I said, the neighbourhood has been supportive of intensifying the site. And, the city is also working with you to make that parquet, which everyone's very much looking forward to. But I was just wondering if I could encourage you to perhaps continue to reach out to residents to share the design updates and information updates as the project progresses. I realize there's probably another couple of years of work for you there. And I had signed up to the updates from the project, but there haven't seemed to be any for a year or so. So I just think, as good neighbours, that it would be a show of really good faith to keep that channel open and to keep residents informed of what's coming up, because there are some quite significant emotional impacts and stress impacts that are affecting residents nearby, and part of it is because they don't know what to expect from one week to the next. So if I could just plant that seed with you and invite you to just strengthen that relationship with your neighbours again, I think that would go a really long way to helping the residents who are going to be your neighbours.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. And I'll just add to your comments there. Certainly, at this point in the project, as we're nearing site plan approval for phase 2, there have been some minor updates to the drawings. And as planner John Voss noted earlier on this call, those drawings are available through the city's website. And so certainly residents within the neighborhood can access the most current drawings by contacting the planning department. And secondly, in regards to communication for construction activities, you're absolutely correct, Councillor. It is a long process, and we need to be periodically updating residents. As we are getting close now to starting our phase 2, it's a very good time for us to provide an update to residents to inform them of the activities that are going to be coming up on site, and an update to the overall schedule for residents, so that they're to your point, fully up to date on the site works that are occurring.
That would be fantastic. I look forward to receiving that in my inbox as well, given that I'm on your mailing list. Thank you very much, Chair. That was all from me. Thank you.
Okay, I see no other questions for our registered delegates. So I will now check with the clerk to see if we have received any additional delegations. We are checking on this now. Remember, if you would like to speak at the meeting, please call the clerk's office at 519-747-8705. Seeing as how there are no further delegations, so as the clerk informs me there are no further speakers, this formal public meeting is concluded. And the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. Do I see anyone with a motion or debate? I see Councillor Bonagor will read the Bill 73 wording, and Councillor Freeman will second that reading. So Councillor Bonagor, go ahead, and then after you're done, we'll go down to Ward 1 for the vote.
Thank you. I'm looking up the wording as we speak. I don't.
Well, how about I suggest the wording and you confirm that that is indeed the motion you wish to move?
That sounds perfect. I don't seem to have it in my inbox. I don't know what I've done. My apologies.
Emails happen like that. Whereas Council has considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders, and whereas Council has considered the professional opinions of planning staff, therefore be it resolved, 1, that Council approve report IPPW 2022-029, 2, that zoning bylaw amendment Z-21-11, holding removal application, reads Heritage Homes for part of 99 to 107 Rogers Street, be approved in accordance with Section 5 of IPPW 2022-029. Is that what you move, Councillor Bonagor?
That is indeed what I move. Thank you very much, Chair Henry.
Well done. I like that dance, and Councillor Freeman seconded that. So we will go down to Ward 1 to start the vote.
Coming up to Ward 1, Councillor Hammer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Gorski from Southerly Ward 1 in favor.
And the chair from the top of a hill, who would have to go way down a hill and then way back up an even bigger hill to get to Ward 1, is in favor as well, so that carries. That takes us to item 10, consideration of notice of motion given at previous meetings. We have none. Notice of motion, I see none. Communications and correspondence, we have none. Unfinished business, there is none. Questions? Are there questions? Seeing no questions today, is there new business, Council? I see the mayor declaring Ward 1 the south coast of Waterloo. I don't see any further new business from Council, so we'll go to the enactment of bylaws. Do we see anyone looking to move the bylaws?
Chair Henry.
I see Councillor Bassick. Did you have new business?
Yes, under all attendees, not all panelists. Sorry about that. Yeah, my apologies.
Please go ahead. I didn't see that.
Yeah, that's my fault. Yes, just reporting to you from the East Coast, the best coast of Waterloo. Yeah, I think I forgot to share a few weeks ago, and if I did share this, and I'm totally forgetting, about the Vermont Park Neighborhood Association and the L'École Harmonie community garden event. I know I shared a couple of things. Does anyone remember if I did? If I did, just type it in the chat and I'll stop sharing it again. But it was a really wonderful event, sort of a first event of the season, and they had a whole bunch of different things, but the primary purpose was to discuss and vision a forest garden there. And they also brought in an Indigenous seed keeper, Terry Lynn Brandt, to discuss the importance of native seeds and the importance of land and how we can be mindful of land and housing. And it was so much and so much more than I'm saying, but really a beautiful talk. And a really great way to get the gardening season going. And they've gotten started on actually planting this past weekend, I understand, but that was a couple weekends ago. So just wanted to say it was a really wonderful event, and that garden's really been going for a long time, and a really thoughtful garden that really engages with Indigenous communities, Black communities, and the neighboring lower income housing around there as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bassick. Is there any other new business, Council? Hearing none and seeing none, I do note that Councillor Hammer has moved the enactment of bylaws and Councillor Freeman has seconded that. So we will go to the southwest to start the vote.
Councillor Hammer from the Gold Coast of Waterloo, Ward 1, votes in favor.
Councillor Bodley from the Yukon of Waterloo votes in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Mayor Jaworski in favor.
And the chair is in favor, so those carry. Anyone looking to adjourn this meeting? Maybe get out to the garden after you've done so. Who would like to move adjournment? Moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Mayor Jaworski. So we'll go back down to Councillor Hammer to start the vote, and we'll adjourn.
Councillor Hammer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick and my very enthusiastic 7-year-old for this meeting to end in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Mayor Jaworski, a very enthusiastic 57-year-old in favor.
And the chair is in favor as well. That's a wrap. Enjoy the afternoon, and we will hear you all back in 2 weeks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Night all.